Rachel McBride stood at the weather-beaten window of her cabin, watching the relentless snow swirl and dance in the howling wind, isolating her further from the world beyond. The howl of the storm echoed within her as she clutched a steaming mug of coffee, her only companion in the silence that enveloped her. It had been 2 years since she'd lost her husband to a tragic accident. A gnarled oak tree falling during a brutal storm had stolen not just his life but also her sense of joy and safety. Maintaining the ranch alone felt heavier with each passing day, memories of happier times taunting her amidst the work that needed to be done. Each task served as a bitter reminder of what she had lost, mending fences that felt as broken as her heart, tending to crops that hadn't yielded as bountifully since his absence, and caring for livestock that mourned along with her. In moments like these, loneliness wrapped around her like a thick wool blanket, even as she remained resilient out of necessity. With every gust outside, Rachel found herself reflecting on the man she once was, the vibrant rancher who danced freely under a summer sun. Now she felt like a figure etched in fading memory, bound to this land by roots that both anchored and imprisoned her. Amidst this cycle of sorrow emerged the flicker of resilience she had to endure for her husband's memory. Hope occasionally crept in, the dream of a vibrant spring where life would return, where everything might feel right again. Little did she know how soon fate would come knocking at her door amid the storm's fury. As a new layer of snow accumulated outside, an urgent instinct stirred within Rachel. She couldn't help but feel that change was imminent, a change that would shake the very foundations of her grief-stricken world and challenge everything she thought she knew. The wind howled like a wounded animal, driving the snow in blinding swirls that enveloped Rachel's cabin in an impenetrable white. Outside, the world was transformed into a desolate wilderness where life felt suspended, and the only sound was the relentless assault of nature. Rachel peered through the frosted glass, feeling both captivated and claustrophobic by the swirling snow, each flake falling like a ghost from her past, whispering reminders of what she had lost. With no choice but to hunker down, her senses sharpened, the storm felt alive with potential danger. The isolation pressed upon her chest, heavy and suffocating, yet it also ignited a spark of determination within her. She was familiar with hardship, and her grit had carried her this far, but even she could feel that the ferocity of this blizzard was different. It seemed intent on forcing her to confront something she had avoided for too long. Rachel stoked the fire, its warmth battling against the biting chill that seeped through the walls. She busied herself with chores, yet her mind drifted. Thoughts flickered between memories of summers spent under an open sky and the stark loneliness that now filled each corner of her cabin. As night fell and darkness consumed the land outside, she settled by the window, unease settling in around her like an unwelcome guest. Suddenly, a distant sound broke through the wind, the crunch of boots on snow or perhaps a call for help. Heart racing, she stood up and squinted into the dimness beyond her doorstep. The urgency of the moment pulled at her instincts. Torn between fear and compassion, Rachel wrestled with herself. Should she remain safely inside or venture out into the tempest? Her decision teetered on a delicate balance, a gamble against nature's wrath that would soon set into motion a series of events beyond her comprehension. Taking a deep breath, bracing against resolve and trepidation alike, Rachel clutched her coat tightly around herself and stepped out into the howling storm. The night beckoned her forward into uncertainty, even as destiny loomed just ahead in the blizzard's embrace. Rachel braced herself against the harsh wind as she stepped out into the swirling snow, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. Each step took her deeper into the storm, the cold clawing at her skin and wrapping around her like an icy shroud. Yet, driven by an instinct she could not ignore, she pressed on, straining to hear anything beyond the howling gale. The muffled crunch of snow beneath her boots guided her forward until something caught her eye, a dark form half buried in a drift, barely distinguishable from the surrounding whiteness. Panic surged within her as she raced toward it, realizing that it was a man, unconscious and seemingly lifeless. An urgent sense of purpose electrified Rachel as she knelt beside him, burying her hands in the snow to brush it aside. He was unresponsive, his skin a ghastly shade of blue from the cold. Rachel's heart raced, despite her instincts screaming at her about the danger of helping a stranger in such brutal conditions. She couldn't leave him there to die. She rolled him onto his back with great effort and felt for a pulse, weak but present. Gritting her teeth against the pain of doubt that gnawed at her conscience, she hoisted him up and began dragging him toward her cabin. Once inside, Rachel moved swiftly but gently. She laid him by the fire, quickly covering him with blankets before rushing to fetch hot water and rags. As she tended to his frostbitten fingers and face, a flicker of life returned to his features, though he remained unconscious for now. She found herself drawn to him in a way that both intrigued and frightened her. Time slipped away as Rachel worked steadily, almost forgetting herself in the rhythm of care. It was then that he began to stir faintly, groaning as he regained consciousness. For a moment recognition flashed across his face as he murmured something barely audible, a name that sent chills down Rachel's spine. Her pulse quickened as clarity began to dawn. He was Judson Kaine, the gun-for-hire linked to tragedy in her past. The warmth of compassion clashed violently with an instinctual urge for retribution. In this life-altering moment, Rachel understood that she had invited danger into her sanctuary and now faced an impossible choice: save or condemn. With the man laid before her, Rachel felt a strange mix of urgency and trepidation. She meticulously removed his soaked clothing, revealing frostbitten skin that sent a jolt of empathy through her. Each touch was gentle as she soaked cloths in warm water, carefully applying them to his cold body to revive him from near death. Her instincts as a nurturer kicked in, urging her to do everything in her power to bring him back. As she worked, Rachel couldn't shake the lingering doubts in her mind. Who was this man really? What brought him to her doorstep in such a dire state? The memory of her brother's face flashed through her thoughts, mingling with the whispers of caution that warned her not to trust so easily. She pushed those thoughts aside, reminding herself of the humanity that dictated her actions. He was a person in need, and in that moment he was beyond just a stranger. He was a life she could save. Rachel focused intently on his wounds, wrapping his hands and checking for signs of responsiveness. She poured hot broth into a cup, coaxing him to drink as he stirred restlessly. His eyelids fluttered open for brief moments, but he seemed lost between consciousness and oblivion. She spoke softly to him, words of comfort as much for herself as for him, hoping to bridge the gap between their two worlds. Yet beneath her nurturing exterior simmered a tumult of conflicting emotions. A part of her wanted to believe that this man would be grateful for her kindness, that he could somehow repay her loyalty with his own. But another part couldn't help but remember the stories, the notorious reputation that preceded him and the pain his actions had caused. As the fire crackled nearby, Rachel's heart raced with uncertainty. She was committed to tending to him, but lingering questions gnawed at her. Could mercy coexist with the suspicion that shadowed his presence? Was she harboring a monster within the walls of her sanctuary? With each passing moment, the line between savior and enemy blurred further, compelling Rachel to confront not only the man before her but also the truths she had long kept buried in her heart. As the storm began to wane, the howling wind softened into a hesitant sigh, and rays of weak sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating Rachel's cabin. However, the lifting of the storm did little to alleviate the growing tension within her. The man she had saved was now conscious, and with each passing hour he began to regain strength, an unsettling reminder that her actions had consequences she couldn't quite fathom. Rachel busied herself with preparations around the cabin, but her mind was constantly drawn back to him. She watched from a distance as he stirred, his sunken cheeks gradually filling out with color. He was no longer just a half-frozen stranger. He was Judson Kaine, the man who lived on the dark side of the law who had shattered her family 5 years ago. The thought alone sent shivers coursing down her spine. She reflected on her life as a rancher, recalling laughter shared in fields bursting with wildflowers and evenings spent under starry skies with her husband. Those memories teetered precariously on the edge of bliss and despair, casting a shadow on her heart. The stark reality of her current predicament felt sharp, each heartbeat echoing in her ears as she struggled to reconcile the vibrant life she once led with the weight of grief and vengeance that now bound her. Every creak of the cabin sent her pulse racing. Was she safe harboring a man whose very name inspired fear and anger? The conflicting emotions roiled within her, compassion for his vulnerability warred with the memories of loss that had festered over the years. The lines between right and wrong blurred further as Rachel found herself caught in a tempest more daunting than the one that had originally brought him to her door. As he regained his strength, their interactions grew more charged. She would catch glimpses of the man he once was before notoriety tainted his existence, and wondered if she was seeing him at all or merely projecting hope onto someone undeserving. Could she quell her instinct for revenge and see him as a human being? Or would she ultimately succumb to the cyclone of rage that loomed large in her past? Each moment spent together pushed Rachel closer to an inevitable confrontation with not just him, but with truths about herself that she could no longer ignore. The days passed, and the atmosphere in the cabin shifted as Judson Kaine regained his strength. Rachel found herself on edge, acutely aware of every sound and movement he made. She would often glance his way, her heart racing with a mixture of concern and apprehension. Each moment spent tending to him felt like a delicate dance between compassion and fear. One evening, as the fire crackled softly, Rachel prepared a meal, the aroma of stew filling the air. She could hear Kaine shifting on the makeshift bed she had arranged for him in the corner of the room. The cabin was dimly lit, shadows flickering against the walls as she stirred the pot, her thoughts wandering to the life she had lost and to the man before her, an enigma wrapped in a past that haunted her. Suddenly she heard him mutter something under his breath. Leaning closer, trying to catch his words, Rachel froze as a name slipped from his lips, a name that echoed like a gunshot in her mind, David. It was her brother's name. Her heart dropped into her stomach as memories surged forth, David's laughter, his fierce spirit, and ultimately the day he didn't come home. The pain of loss crashed over her like a wave, threatening to pull her under. How could this man be intertwined with such memories? The very mention of David's name ignited a storm of emotions within her. Rachel's hands trembled as she set down the spoon, turmoil bubbled up inside her like an angry tide. Kaine's past was not just a shadow but a reality that now intruded upon her sanctuary. Had he known David, had he been involved in those final moments that had shattered their family, her instincts screamed at her to confront him about it, to demand answers that might finally provide closure. Yet another part of her hesitated. She had extended mercy to him when she could have turned him away or worse. Would confronting him reveal truths she wasn't ready to face? Determined yet fearful, Rachel felt trapped between two worlds, the life where David was still alive and this new one where Judson Kaine lingered like an unwelcome ghost. She realized that this encounter would force her to reckon not only with Kaine's identity, but also with her own understanding of justice and forgiveness. The whispered name hung heavy in the air between them, marking a turning point in their fragile dynamic as Rachel prepared herself for an unavoidable confrontation with both Kaine and the ghosts of her past. As the fire crackled softly in the dim light of the cabin, Rachel found herself lost in thought, the atmosphere heavy with memories that threatened to engulf her. The mention of her brother's name, David, by Judson Kaine echoed in her mind, stirring recollections from the past, moments she had long tried to tuck away. Suddenly she was transported back 5 years to a sun-drenched afternoon on the ranch. The land stretched out before her, vibrant and alive, as her brother and her husband worked side by side, laughing over a friendly argument about fence placement. Their camaraderie filled the air with warmth, a contrast to the bitter chill of the current storm. Rachel remembered how David had been fiercely protective of their land. It was more than just dirt and grass, it was their heritage, a legacy passed down through generations. But as disputes arose over property lines and grazing rights, tensions escalated in their small community. Rachel could still picture the wanted poster that had circulated after David's death, his youthful face captured in ink, juxtaposed against whispers of betrayal and gunfire, an image that haunted her dreams. She recalled the fear that gripped her heart when news reached the ranch. David had been killed during a confrontation over land, a fight that had drawn in men like Judson Kaine, known for his ruthless methods. The pain of that day washed over Rachel anew. David's laughter had been silenced too soon, leaving behind an emptiness so profound that it twisted her gut. The anger she felt towards those who had wronged him morphed into something more complex as she recalled the stories of how he had stood bravely for what he believed in. Rachel's thoughts spiraled into turmoil as she grappled with the possibility that her understanding of those events might be flawed. Was Kaine truly the monster she had painted him to be, or were there layers of truth obscured by her grief? The walls of her sanctuary seemed to close in as the specter of her brother's unresolved story beckoned her for answers. With every tick of the clock on the wall, the urgency pulsed within her. She needed to confront Kaine not just for David's sake, but for her own healing as well. The weight of her brother's memory hung heavy in the air, pushing Rachel toward an inevitable reckoning with both Kaine and the ghosts of her past. This dance between forgiveness and revenge was a delicate one, and she knew she could no longer avoid it. As dusk fell over the cabin, casting long shadows across the room, Rachel felt an unsettling mix of anticipation and dread settle in her chest. The crackling fire provided warmth, yet the atmosphere grew colder with the weight of her thoughts. She was alone with Judson Kaine, and the reality of their situation pressed heavily upon her. Memories of her brother David intertwined with the present, stirring a tumult of emotions that had festered for years. Rachel paced the small space, unable to shake the internal conflict churning within her. Her loyalty to David's memory urged her to see Kaine as the villain he was said to be, the man responsible for tearing their family apart. Yet, a deeper voice inside her prompted pause. Was he truly the monster she had painted him to be? The complexities of life had revealed themselves in shades of gray, and she knew that simplicity was a luxury she could no longer afford. As night closed in around them, Rachel recalled the stories shared in hushed tones after David's death, tales of a land dispute turned deadly. But alongside those memories were whispers of uncertainty. David had been passionate and stubborn, perhaps even reckless when standing up for what he believed was right. Had he contributed to his own fate? Suddenly, she longed for clarity. She needed answers, not just for her own sake, but for her brother's spirit, which still lingered like a specter in her home. What if Kaine's story held pieces that could reshape her understanding? The notion felt both dangerous and exhilarating, stirring a restless energy within her. Gathering her courage, Rachel resolved to confront him. With every step toward Kaine's makeshift bed, her heart raced with trepidation. This was no casual conversation, but a confrontation that could reveal the truth behind the tragedy she had lived with for years. "Judson," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze, "I need to know about what happened between you and my brother." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken truths, each second stretching like eternity as she prepared to face the truth, whatever it might reveal. Would it solidify her hatred or shatter everything she believed? The moment had arrived for her to confront not only Kaine but also her loyalty to a memory that shaped her existence. As the days passed and the snow slowly melted outside, Rachel found herself trapped in a storm of moral uncertainty. Judson Kaine, now fully conscious and recovering, posed a dilemma that gnawed at her conscience. With each flicker of the candlelight casting shadows around the cabin, she could almost feel the weight of her brother's memory pressing down on her, urging her to seek justice for his untimely death. The thaw brought with it a sense of urgency. The isolation of winter was giving way to a world that would soon be bustling again, a world where people would question her choices and actions. Rachel knew that soon she would have to decide what to do with Kaine. Should she turn him over to the authorities and let the law take its course? Doing so would mean confronting the ghosts of her past and acknowledging a truth she had long hidden from herself. The law held no mercy for men like him, but did it truly hold justice for David? Yet part of her hesitated. The man lying in her cabin was not just a notorious gun for hire, he was human, vulnerable in his current state. Their conversations had revealed glimpses of Kaine's life, stories of desperation and choices made in the heat of conflict. Could there be layers to his character that she had yet to uncover? Did he bear responsibility for David's death, or was there more to the story that had been obscured by grief and rage? Rachel's heart raced as she considered another option, taking justice into her own hands. It was a seductive thought, the idea of avenging her brother herself, of reclaiming control over a narrative that had left her feeling powerless for so long. But what would that make her? A killer like Kaine, or a protector fulfilling a vow to defend the memory of a loved one? The cabin felt smaller as those thoughts spiraled in her mind, closing in on her like thick fog. She envisioned facing Kaine with the weapon she kept close. It would be so easy to make that choice in a moment filled with pain and anger. Yet every time she imagined it, another part of her cried out against such violence. Standing at the crossroads of vengeance and mercy, Rachel grappled with conflicting emotions, her loyalty to David clashing with an emerging understanding that life was rarely black and white. Whatever decision she made, it would shape not only the future of her family's legacy, but also who she would become in the process. With the thaw approaching, she felt time slipping away, compelling her toward an inevitable confrontation with Kaine and with herself. As the days turned into weeks, Judson Kaine's strength returned, and with it came the slow unraveling of his story. The thaw brought not only warmer weather but also newfound clarity in their conversations. Rachel found herself drawn to him, her curiosity battling against her ingrained distrust. Each exchange peeled back layers of his character, revealing glimpses of a man shaped by hardship and choices that had led him down a dark path. One evening, as they sat across from each other by the fire, Rachel couldn't suppress her urge to understand more. Why did you come here? What happened between you and my brother? She asked, her voice steadier than the turmoil roiling inside her. Kaine hesitated, the shadows dancing across his face as he collected his thoughts. I wasn't the monster everyone made me out to be, he began, his tone low and measured. David was a good man, a passionate man, but he was stubborn. The land dispute was more complicated than just two men arguing over property. There were forces at work that neither of us truly understood. Rachel listened closely as Kaine shared details of that fateful day, how tensions had escalated beyond reason and how desperation had driven them both to a point of no return. He painted a picture of a clash fueled not just by anger but by fear for their livelihoods, men on both sides unwilling to yield. As he spoke, Rachel found herself wrestling with her perceptions. The narrative she had held onto for so long began to shift like the melting snow outside. Was it self-defense? She challenged, her heart racing as she sought answers that could either dismantle her vendetta or solidify it further. Kaine's eyes met hers, filled with a vulnerability she hadn't expected. It wasn't as simple as that, Rachel. In the heat of the moment, everything blurs. I never intended for anyone to get hurt, but things spiraled out of control. With every word, Rachel felt the foundation of her beliefs quaking beneath her. Was it possible that David had been equally responsible for his fate? The thought sent waves of confusion crashing over her. How could she reconcile this new perspective with the anger that had fueled her grief? As the fire crackled softly beside them, Rachel realized that understanding Kaine's side of the story was forcing her to reassess her own beliefs about justice and retribution. If she were to confront him about David's death, would it be out of a desire for vengeance or for the truth? The complexity of their situation deepened with each revelation, propelling Rachel toward an inevitable conclusion. To truly honor David's memory, she would need to embrace the messy reality of life's moral ambiguities. The air in the cabin grew thick with tension as Rachel prepared for the confrontation she had long avoided. Judson Kaine sat before her, his presence both familiar and foreign, embodying the pain of her past and the uncertainty of her future. The fire crackled softly, but Rachel felt cold, her heart pounding as she steeled herself for the conversation that could change everything. Judson, she began, her voice trembling slightly despite her resolve. We need to talk about what happened between you and my brother. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating yet necessary. Kaine met her gaze, his expression unreadable. I knew this would come, he replied, his tone somber. But it's not as simple as you think. Rachel could feel the anger simmering beneath her skin, a sharp reminder of her brother's absence. You killed him, she shot back, the accusation spilling out before she could rein it in. How can you sit there and act like you didn't have a choice? I did what I had to do to survive, Kaine countered, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Your brother wasn't innocent in all this. He was brave, but he was reckless too. That day, it wasn't just a fight over land, it was a culmination of desperation and fear. Rachel's heart raced at his words, confusion swirling within her. Could David really have been partly responsible? The narrative she'd held onto for years felt fragile now, like glass on the verge of shattering. So you're saying he deserved what happened? No, Kaine said urgently, shaking his head. What I'm saying is that things spiraled out of control. That day was chaos for us both. I never wanted him dead. The truth in his eyes sparked something deep within Rachel, a flicker of understanding mixed with betrayal. She had sought clarity, but now she was left grappling with more questions than answers. You expect me to believe that? You're the one who walked away while my brother didn't. I didn't walk away, he insisted, frustration creeping into his voice. I lost everything that day too. As silence fell between them, Rachel felt the weight of their shared grief settle heavily in the space. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore, it was about recognizing the complexity of their lives, two men caught in a system bigger than themselves, each with their own reasons for fighting. Maybe I'm not here to absolve you, Rachel finally admitted, her voice softer now. But I need to understand the truth, not just for David, but for myself. Kaine nodded slowly, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. Then let me tell you everything. In that moment, Rachel realized this confrontation was not just a test of her values, but an invitation to redefine them. The path ahead would not be easy, but perhaps it was time to embrace the messy reality of truth and forgiveness, both for Kaine and for herself. As the final patches of snow melted away, Rachel felt a shift within herself, a sensation almost tangible in the crisp spring air. The once oppressive weight of winter had lifted, yet the emotional storm still raged inside her. The discussions with Judson Kaine had opened new avenues of thought, forcing her to confront truths she had long buried. Now, as she walked through her land, the land that had once flourished with laughter and life, she weighed the heavy burden of her choices. Standing amid the budding trees and fresh blooms, Rachel recalled her brother David's fervor for their ranch, how he fought to maintain their way of life against overwhelming odds. That passion was both admirable and reckless. It had ultimately led him to his death. She found herself torn between that fierce loyalty to his memory and the reality that Kaine presented, a man shaped by circumstances similar yet different from David's. Rachel's gaze drifted towards the horizon as she considered her options concerning Kaine. Turning him and felt like a betrayal of everything she'd learned about compassion and complexity in their conversations. Yet allowing him to roam free posed a risk she couldn't ignore. What if he returned to his former life? Could she trust him? The echo of David's laughter floated through her thoughts as she recalled how often he spoke of justice versus revenge. Justice is what we seek, Rachel, he would say, but revenge only breeds more hatred. Those words echoed loudly now as she moved forward in her thinking. With each passing moment, Rachel recognized that forgiveness was not just about absolving Kaine, but also liberating herself from years of grief and anger. By holding on to vengeance, she'd been shackled by pain, the kind that could poison one's heart if left unchecked. As spring blossomed around her, Rachel made a decision that felt simultaneously fraught and freeing, to approach Kaine once more not as an accuser but as someone seeking understanding and truth. She would find a way to make peace with the past while honoring David's memory not through anger but through compassion. Returning to the cabin where Kaine was recuperating, Rachel felt lighter yet resolute. It was time for a new chapter, one that encompassed mercy while acknowledging the complicated scars left behind by loss. In this moment, she understood that embracing ambiguity might lead her toward not only healing for herself, but also an unexpected path for Kaine, a chance at redemption they both desperately needed. As the last remnants of snow melted away, Rachel stepped outside, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face for the first time in months. The landscape around her transformed, vibrant greens and colorful blossoms emerging from the earth, symbolizing renewal and growth. Yet within her heart, a different kind of thaw was taking place, one that melded the pain of loss with the possibility of forgiveness. The conversations with Judson Kaine had shifted something profound within Rachel. No longer just the man she once viewed as a monster, he had become a complex figure shaped by desperation, fear, and ultimately, regret. She realized that her understanding of right and wrong was not as black and white as she had once believed. Life was full of shades of gray that demanded acknowledgement. Rachel reflected on her brother David's memory, recalling not just his fierce loyalty to their land, but also his stubbornness that had led to conflict. It struck her that perhaps David too had been trapped in a cycle of vengeance, fighting for what he believed was right without recognizing the potential consequences. This realization weighed heavily on her. Could she honor him by breaking that cycle? With newfound clarity, Rachel made her way back to the cabin where Kaine was staying. Each step felt lighter yet purposeful. She understood that her decision to confront him once more was not solely about seeking closure for herself, but also about extending compassion, a chance for both of them to heal. When she entered the cabin, Kaine looked up, his expression a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "Rachel," he said softly, almost pleadingly. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. "About David, about us." Kaine nodded, anticipation etched across his features. "I want to understand what happened, not just for my sake but for his memory too. If we can find a way to move forward, I believe we can break free from this pain." As Rachel spoke those words, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The harsh winter had passed, both outside and within. In its place was an opportunity for redemption, not just for Kaine but for herself. In that moment, as they stood together amid the remnants of winter's grip and the promise of spring's embrace, Rachel knew she was ready to embrace this new chapter in their lives. With courage and compassion as her guide, she was prepared to navigate the complexities ahead, forging a path toward healing and understanding that would ultimately shape her future and restore peace to her heart.